Coming up on the Point and Click podcast, we'll talk with Mike Lucia about cybersecurity, cloud computing, and AI. That's next. Welcome to the Point and Click podcast. I'm Mark Yavchak. Our special guest, Mike Lucia, got his first computer in 1977 and was online by the early 1980s, gaming. In the 90s, Mike helped hundreds of adults learn to use computers and the World Wide Web before moving into the business technology field. There, he would remain for the rest of his professional career as a technician, project manager, consultant, help desk manager, product support manager, systems manager, and executive. Mike served as the president of the Central New York PC Users Group, which led to a role on Time Warner Cable's technology program, Point and Click. Mike is finishing his Moyne College Masters of Information Systems, along with a Syracuse University Certificate of Advanced Study in Data Security Management. So welcome to the show, Mike. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. What have you been up to since the computer show back in the early 2000s?
Hi, Mark. Well, thanks for having me. I've been keeping pretty busy during that time. I've primarily been working in different capacities in either information technology or consulting, or business roles where I was not in IT, but very much adjacent to IT. Like my current role, I work for a company that makes forklifts, but I manage the electronic parts catalog for that company. So I'm not an IT person, but I'm responsible for a full application, front end, back end, database, web app on the front, integrations with lots of other systems, updates, new development, all that stuff all falls under me. So everything that I've done, really for the last 25 years has all been technology related in some capacity.
Yeah, I know back when we were doing the computer show, we went off, I think, 2002, 2003. I think at the time you were working for one of our, for those that aren't familiar with the Syracuse area, there's a fairly large casino complex in Oneida, New York. You were working for the Turning Stone for a short time, I believe, right after the show or during the show.
Yep,
and
that's
probably
right.
For a short time after. And you were involved in working on the systems that supported the machines that were running on the floor, I'm assuming, if I got that correctly.
That's right. I was part of the IT department for the commercial side of the nation, and so we supported all the desktops of the office people and that sort of stuff, and also the what they call multi games also fell under us in IT.
So were all those? I never asked you this question. Were all those machines at the Turning Stone, were they all interconnected, networked?
They were. In fact, they were a little unique, I think, at least the way they did them 20 years ago. I really haven't kept up on the technology, but they weren't slot machines, and that was a very deliberate choice because based on their compact with the state, it had an effect on how much revenue, if any, they had to share with the state. It was a slot machine, and it fell under certain criteria that defined a slot machine, then it was one amount. And if it wasn't a slot machine, then it was another amount or potentially none at all. So they actually all were, they were all just terminals displaying the results of games that were continuously running in the back on the server. So when you hit a button, you didn't influence the game in any way. You just caused one of the games to be displayed on your screen and associated with you. And if it was a winning game, then you won. If it wasn't a winning game, you didn't. And then, you'd tell it to go again, and it would go grab another game off the back end server. So yeah, it was a very kind of creative way and very much networked, because it literally couldn't work if they weren't connected to those back end servers.
That's incredible. So you're, I would assume, from just an accounting point of view, they could probably just keep track of how machines were performing and how much payouts there were, and
oh, sure. Yeah.
Oh, that's
and
incredible.
It was all, there was no cash involved. It was all
cards,
on your player card. So yeah, very, for the time, I mean, we're talking, 2000, 2003 time frame, very innovative.
Well, that's ahead of its curve, because really, if you think about it, I mean, from what little I haven't done a lot of reading on how casinos operate, but I had a brother, actually a cousin, who worked at Circus in Las Vegas.
Mhm.
And he was involved he was maintenance. He was more of the hardcore maintenance of the actual, the one-armed bandits, the slot machines.
Yep.
It probably wasn't as networked as it is probably now. But I remember him mentioning how, oh, yeah, they're moving into the technology. Eventually, these machines are going to be all tied together. He didn't really have the terminology because they didn't even have the terminology at the time.
Yep.
And I found it intriguing that I'm thinking to myself, wow, so somebody could sit in a back room, and if one machine looks like it's a little wonky or things are not quite right, they can take it offline and say, okay, that machine's not in service right now, and then, move on to the next one. And so I can see how that could be a very lucrative business to be involved in, to be able to maintain those machines.
Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about. I know we chatted a little bit before the podcast. Let's just talk a little bit about how technology has kind of evolved over the last 20, 30 years. I mean, we were on, like I told you early on, we started the show in the mid 90s, which was just at the beginning of everybody wanting to get online.
Yep.
Computer technology, I think we were working with Windows 95, at the time. It had just come out. Majority of the people were using AOL to get online. If people are watching are not familiar with that, it was a dial-up service. And by that, I mean they had what was called a telephone modem that they put their connected their computer to, and it would literally dial an exchange to connect that person's computer to a wider network. That was the equivalent of the World Wide Web today. Now, we started back in the 90s on AOL, and as our company, Time Warner, pushed into the world of high-speed online, they said, okay, we're going to offer you a service called Roadrunner, and we'd like you to put it on your computers on the show and talk to the viewers about what. And I knew what they were up to. There was the value of marketing to a direct audience that was interested in what we were serving. So we were at the beginning of that, but tell me a little bit about your insight into how technology has changed.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, partly because I'm currently a graduate student working on a master's degree, and for one of the classes we were talking about, the history of corporate ERP systems. But from there I kind of extrapolated out, and it's really started thinking about we've come along far enough now that you can look back and you can see these cycles of things that have happened. So, if you go back to the 1980s and before, and everything was all mainframes. And if you weren't a big company or the government, you just didn't have a computer. Like you might have had a typewriter, or you just wrote everything out by hand, and that's all there really was. There was no networking, except connecting dumb terminals to the mainframe. That was as much networking as you had. And it was all, it was universities, government, and big, usually financial services companies and stuff. And then in the 80s, mid 80s, you got the IBM PC came out, and, it was still very niche, but you start seeing computers showing up on people's desks at work. If they were really, into technology, then somebody might have one at home. But still, in its infancy, you had to really understand how the technology worked, and it could be a little flaky, definitely not user-friendly. But then in the 90s, we got, like you were saying, Windows 95 came out, and that was really the thing that let people get comfortable with computers. It was a relatively user-friendly interface for the first time, and it had the ability to connect to the internet if you had an internet service provider of some sort, and so that really was where the internet age really kicked off there, with the combination of the home computer finally being a viable thing that folks could get comfortable with, and the advent of first it was AOL, and then it was things like Roadrunner broadband really let people start getting online, which then brought with it that whole e-commerce worldwide web age, where if you remember back right around when the show was on, the late 90s and into early 2000, you had companies and investors just throwing money at the anybody that was like, we've got an idea for a web-based business. Great. Here's $1 million. Go do it. And most of them failed. And in fact, we had a big market crash. Almost exactly 24 years ago this month, huge market crash, the dot-com bust, where it just couldn't keep up with all the money people were throwing at it. But that for that period in the next 10 years, it was all about, we got to get on the web. That was everybody's focus, is we got to be on the web. We got to have e-commerce. We got to be out there driving business from the web. And then that was where we started to see, a lot of change in our everyday lives, in our culture, in our society. It was the beginning of the end of the shopping mall, which from the 80s to the early 2000s had been kind of the village square in the central marketplace for, a lot of communities around the country. And now they're all gone because e-commerce drove everybody to the web. And so that was another, cyclical period of everybody getting online. And by 2010 or thereabouts, we started moving into the next era, which is, broadband had started getting really fast and relatively inexpensive. So now we pushed everything up to the cloud. We pushed all of our applications. We pushed all of our data out to the cloud. And so for that 10-year or so period, the mantra was, we got to get to the cloud. We got to have our everything got to be up in the cloud. And, you had Google Docs, and you had, all these web-based services, Dropbox and things like that. And everybody was putting everything on the cloud. And then by, 2020, the cloud was kind of passé. Everybody understood it at that point. You were using it in various ways, but not necessarily super new and creative ways, because folks pretty well gotten it figured out. And along comes AI. And so now, for the last couple years, and definitely for the next several at least, that's the big thing. That's where everybody is right now. AI. We got to get AI. We got to enable our AI in our tools. We got to take advantage of AI to maintain that competitive advantage, or to make sure that we're, at least keeping up with our competitors. And, is AI good or is it bad? And, should we be afraid of it, or should we be using it? And, all those kinds of conversations that are, not dissimilar from the conversations that people had about cloud 10 years ago and about the web 10 years before that. It all just comes around. Period after period, we see these same conversations as the great new technology comes along.
Yeah, things actually, I was just thinking as you were talking about how the technology was evolving. I think along with that, those changes, along with those pushes to faster connections to cloud services, something that became even more to the forefront as that was happening was cybersecurity. I think as more and more people were tied into these networks, and more computers were available to maybe bad actors, if you want to use the term. The reality of having this interconnectability, this high speed, this everybody's connected together, opened up a whole world of protecting those computers. Talk a little bit, if you could, explain maybe, because we use the term a lot, I think, explain a little bit about what cybersecurity is in simple terms for an everyday user. What would they need to know about cybersecurity?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, at its foundationally as an element of information technology, cybersecurity is anything. It deals with anything that impacts any of the three, what are called like the three legs of cybersecurity, which is confidentiality. Is your info private? Integrity. Is your data, has it been modified, deleted, changed in any way that you're not aware of or didn't authorize? And availability. Can you get to your data when you want to and when you need to? So those are the three pillars of cybersecurity, and everything that impacts those three things is part of sort of the realm of cybersecurity, and trying to keep you safe, try to keep businesses safe, try to keep people's data safe. So that it's not compromised for privacy, that it's not being modified when you don't know about it, and that you can get to it when you need to and expect to get to it.
What are, I know my past experiences with security threats in terms of data breaches, for instance. I know everybody's had exposure to, the letter in the mail saying, oh, your personal information was potentially compromised.
That's
we're
right.
going to give you a year's worth of identity protection because our system was breached. The first one that was major for me was the Home Depot, or actually, excuse me, the Target breach.
Yep.
It was the weekend. I think it was Cyber Weekend. Actually, was the weekend that it happened. We happened to use our credit card at Target locally, and we were part of that breach. I mean, we actually had fraud on our account because of that. And I had to call. I didn't even realize the procedure. I had to call the police. An investigator, I don't know if they call them cyber police, but it was an officer came in. I filled out a report. He goes, "You're going to need a copy of this to give to your credit card company," and they'll, from that point on, it's record. This happened. But let's talk a little bit about what kind of threats there are for people out there. Maybe individuals and businesses might face, and how can they protect themselves from this?
Absolutely. And that Target breach, I did a case study on that in one of my cybersecurity classes. Absolutely fascinating. The way that the hackers hacked it. There's different levels of difficulty and expertise that go into different types of hacks. Some are just people who don't necessarily know the technology in great depth, but they have good tools and they just use the tools and they just kind of keep plugging away until something works. This was not that. This was an individual or group who intimately understood the way computer technology works. And they used every trick in the book to worm their way in and then take, control. Once they were in, they set themselves up as system administrators and nobody noticed. Wow. And then once they're a system administrator, they can give themselves to, some unused server that nobody really pays any attention to. They set that up as an intermediary, talking to an outside, what they call a CNC or command and control box. And it's reporting data out to there and getting commands back in. And they poke holes in the firewall so it doesn't, traffic doesn't raise any flags, because as far as anybody looking at it can tell, it was set up by a authorized system administrator. And it's all good. From there, they got into the point of sale terminals, and that's how they stole people's credit card information. And it wasn't properly encrypted the way it should have been with the what's called the PCI DSS standard, which is the standard for how credit card processors or credit card businesses that use credit cards are supposed to behave, including encrypting certain data and not keeping other data. Target didn't do that. It was a really fascinating study to dig into that. And it outlines there are things you have control over and there are things you don't have control over as an individual and to an extent as a company, though there's typically more that companies can do. As an individual, the situation you were in, there was literally nothing you could have done about that than not shopping at Target, which I wouldn't show, like everybody else does. From that perspective, from protecting yourself against those kinds of breaches, you typically can't stop it. So what can you do? Well, you can try to minimize the impact. And the best piece of advice that I have for individuals is there are 3 credit reporting agencies, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. And you can go to each of them and create an account if you don't already have one. It's free. And you can freeze your credit reporting on all 3 of those services. And what that means is that even if somebody has your social security number, your name, your address, your date of birth, all of those, really useful pieces of information that you would prefer nobody have that doesn't, need them, they can't take out loans in your name. They can't put in credit cards in your name. They can still, if they've stolen your credit card information, they can probably use that, but you're not liable for that by law. But, if they have your personally identifiable information, they can do things like take out loans and things of that nature. And this blocks it because nobody will give out money to you if they can't prove that you are who you say you are. And the only way to do that is to go and get a credit report and see, this person has good credit. So you should go ahead and give them a loan. So that's the biggest piece of advice that I give folks, is to do that. The other thing is for all your bank accounts, for all your social media accounts, for any presence that you have online, don't use the same password, and especially not the same username and password at all of these different sites. I know it's a hassle, but if you get like a password manager on your phone, that will allow you to create unique passcodes, passwords, and they'll be different everywhere. So if one system gets compromised, you don't have to worry that they now have access to all of your online accounts. And turn on two-factor or multi-factor authentication anywhere that you can. If they try to hack your account, they won't be able to get into it unless they, unless they're able to send a code to your phone and get that code to type in, which won't happen if they're not really you.
My daughter, I was going to say my daughter just started with a credit card at one of our local banks. I won't mention the name, but she's been had her account compromised 3 times in the span of 12 months.
Wow.
Now, she does go online. She only shops with the card on Amazon, and so she uses their front end. So she's not dealing with,
so fly-by-night organization.
Yeah, she's not going to a website that is not, that she doesn't know the source of or the reliability of. She's dealing strictly with Amazon. And she had, what I didn't realize in discussing this with the bank manager, because I did talk to the bank manager about it, I said, this is her first credit card, and she's already been compromised 3 times in the span of 12 months. I mean, I've had a credit card since I was, 20 years old. That's 40 years ago. I'm going to date myself here, but and I've maybe had with the, like I said, the Target breach, I also think was a Home Depot breach at one time, and maybe one other vendor that I had a problem with my card information.
In 2010s, there was a
flood,
a full flood of them. Yeah,
but it was like 3 in the span of 40 years. Now she's had that maybe just shows you in a nutshell how prevalent this is now and how endemic or epidemic it is. I mean, you have
that
3
That
breaches.
seems like a lot to me. It's been a while since I've had any kind of credit card issue. And like we were saying, that there was a rash of them for quite a while, a number of years, but that's kind of in the past. So I'm kind of surprised.
And I thought there had to be something,
that seems weird.
Looking at what, she was doing with it now. We started doing something that I think, somebody could do, and that is locking your card. And only unlocking the card when you're going to do a transaction. Now, it's a hassle. Yeah. And I have to admit, this particular vendor, this particular bank does not make it easy. It's 5 menu pages into your app. So it's not something you can do right from the front page, which should be in my opinion, the way it goes. You unlock it when you use it, you lock it. Now, if that's locked, that transaction isn't going to process no matter how many times you try until you unlock the card. I've actually forgotten. I've locked mine and gone to the gas pump, put my card in, and get, your transaction has been denied. And I'm thinking, well, I have money in my bank account, and then it dawns on me, I locked the card. So I know it works, and really that is probably the most, it's almost like putting your card in a safe deposit box, and you only have the key. Yeah. Nobody else does. So, if you're talking to a customer or you're talking to a person about security, are there things they can do in the midst of using their credit cards or doing things like that, short of locking the card? Are there other things they can do to keep their accounts safe? I
mean, I think, generally speaking, be cautious about where you use it. Try to stick with, reputable vendors. Try to make sure that, you're getting to that vendors through their authentic site. If somebody sends you an email that looks legit, don't trust it especially if you weren't expecting it. But instead of clicking on a link, go to the vendor's site and type the name directly into your browser address bar. And then, you're going to where you really want to go, because, links in emails can very easily be manipulated to look spoofing, to look legit when they're in fact sending you to some place that's really close, but not actually where you want to be. And everything you put in there, you're just handing it to a criminal.
Oh my goodness.
So, I think there's other things you can do. It seems like I've heard about, putting your, using like Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, PayPal. Some of those actually, I think, offer additional levels of security as opposed to just putting your credit card information in there. Because again, then you get the two-factor authorization going on in there that, it's going to say, hey, do you want to authorize this payment? And you have to, put your thumbprint on your phone thing. So that's another possible thing that folks might want to look at. But, by and large, I don't worry about credit card fraud as much anymore. Unless it's become a pattern and, clearly is an issue like it is for your daughter. Just because legally, it's kind of not your problem. You want to be responsible. But there are other areas where you're more likely to get into trouble. And I think it's with, phishing for most individuals is the biggest risk these days. Phishing or, some of the social engineering scam where
big time.
They reach out to you and try to convince you that your kid or your grandkid is, in jail or being held hostage or having some other crisis and they need your help immediately. So go get a gift card and, give us the numbers so we can pay their bill or whatever. You get a call that's supposedly from the police or the IRS or the FBI. Those are, really socking people for huge amounts of money.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
You don't always get it back.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that kind of leads me to my next question, which, the future of cybersecurity. Now, I did read an article. The story I read, which I found very intriguing, was how AI could be used to sample a person's voice. And then say, for instance, let's use the example of, I think you brought it up about a grandparent getting a phone call from a grandchild saying, hey, I'm in jail. If a person calls your number and they sample your voice, and even if it's just to get your sample, they don't want to do anything to you necessarily. Now they have a sample of your voice. They have maybe information enough to know, because you can go online. I think Spokio and a couple of other content aggregating or information aggregating services that have things like your past phone numbers, your past street addresses. And believe it or not, do a search on your name on some of these sites, and you'd be amazed at how much information about you is out there. I mean, and it's not even information you have authorized to be used, but it's out there in the wild. Now, take that to that next step. That sampled voice can generate now an AI voice that can say anything. It sounds like your grandchild. People say, well, if it isn't your grandchild and you're not 100% sure, hang up and call that grandchild back or the parent and say, hey, did your grandchild call me, or is there a problem that I need to know of? And 99.9% of the time, I'm not going to say every time, because there are cases where that happens, where they're in trouble and they need help. They say, no, they're right here with me in the living room. We were just talking about calling you and having a weekend getaway with you. And they're like, oh, yeah, I got a call, and the person sounds just like my grandson. Sound just like him. Yeah. So tell me a little bit in your opinion, what is the risk for future, bad actors with this new technology that's coming along?
Oh yeah, I mean it's 100%. The risk is it's coming, and we don't know what it's going to look like, because just as legitimate businesses are coming up with new ways to use artificial intelligence, or what we call artificial intelligence, machine learning, the bad actors are also at the same time looking for how can we leverage this to do new things. And the example that you gave, or even, something even simpler, one of the best ways that you've historically been able to spot phishing attempts is that they're so badly written half the time. Occasionally someone will take the time to build a really well-written, creative, accurate, looking email that really looks like it's coming from Amazon or PayPal or your bank or whatever. But the other half of the time, it looks like it was written by an 8-year-old, because it was written by somebody who's not a native speaker of English. Right. It's coming from Nigeria, or it's coming from Afghanistan or Russia or someplace, China. That's not going to be an issue any longer. I mean, I always kind of wondered why, if you can afford the computer you used to build this and the bandwidth and the software that you need to send out
Right.
1,000 of these emails. Couldn't you pay somebody $30 to proofread it for you? But it won't be an issue anymore. They'll generate it with AI, and they'll tell it what language they want it in, and it'll come out and it'll be more or less flawless.
That's frightening.
And the next step is to take that script and then, like you said, match it with somebody's voice. And now you can do the same thing via voicemails. Your text messages are going to be, more foolproof. Probably already seen, I know I have, calls from companies where it's clear you're not talking to a person, but they're getting harder to tell that it's not a person on the other end of the line when they call you from, government services calling you about, whatever nonsense it is they're pretending to be calling you about. That's going to get more and more realistic as we, unlock this technology. The ability to, try to trick you into giving away your account credentials and things like that. It's going to get more sophisticated.
And it has to, because people are getting more sophisticated in how they use even people that are maybe not focused on those elements of using their computer, or at least a little more savvy because it's been in the media.
Right.
People like my father-in-law, I mentioned a story about how he was prompted, it was social engineering into clicking a box that popped up on his computer about an outdated Adobe program. And long story short, he called the number on it. He engaged with this bad actor. The bad actor installed software on his computer unbeknownst to him, was controlling the computer, was locking it down, and then calling him and saying, "Oh, I see you're having a problem with your computer." No kidding. He shut it down. My father is now hooked, thinks he's got to pay this guy to get the computer working again. Credit card information was dispensed. He lost money. Fortunately, was able to get back most of it. I did kind of a crash cart, ran to his house, pulled the internet connection out of the back of his computer. Realized the sophistication even back then of doing a batch file. So it was installing a bootlogger, our boot program, keylogger, a bunch of software to give this guy complete control. So he had my father hook, line, and sinker, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to intercept before some of the damage was done. But as people get more sophisticated and understand these threats are out there, the bad people have to get more sophisticated to kind of keep pulling the wool. Yeah,
it's a constant progression. Is the attacks get more sophisticated, the defense has to catch up, but then the attacks take it to the next level, and the defense has to catch up, and it's it's a constant battle. And really, I mean, it has been for depending on how you look at it, going back, cryptographically to, even early passcodes and passphrases, to get in through the city walls at night. You had to know what the passcode was, or the guard wasn't going to let you in. That's early cryptography. And we've been fighting that battle ever since to try to keep out people you don't want and can let in people you do want, and be able to communicate in ways that only certain people can understand what you're saying. And it's just as our technology has progressed and gotten more sophisticated, the tools that the people have and the techniques that they have to try to crack that has gotten more sophisticated.
Now, let's, I think that's a good jumping off point for just to get maybe a little bit more into the AI itself. I did talk a little bit about AI with Nancy Roberts a couple weeks back, and how it impacts the creative business, marketing, advertising, public relations. I brought up the story, which I'm sure you're aware of the whole Willy Wonka fiasco, where this guy, generated all this information through AI. He created advertising that was, and you mentioned proofing. The advertising that he produced was chock full of misspellings, and it was obvious that it was not proofed in any way, shape, or form. But let's talk a little bit about what AI is in general terms, and what exactly is it doing? How is it working? And maybe a little bit about where it's heading. What are we looking at in the next 5 or 10 years as this evolves?
The first thing that I think it's important to understand is that when we talk about artificial intelligence, it's definitely artificial, but it's really not intelligence. And in the way that the concept of AI has been portrayed in like science fiction and so forth, where you've got a truly self-aware, thinking, computer system or robot or whatever it is, and it's able to, come up with original ideas and so forth. That is not what's happening here. And, we may be years or decades or never away from, that actual level of sophistication. But what we've got is very cleverly written algorithms, series of data lookups and responses that, are not unlike what we've been seeing for years with Google searches. You type in what you're looking for and Google says, is this what you wanted? And it's accurate most of the time. This is just Google searches on steroids in a lot of ways. Tweaked to do things like, make Beyonce sing a song she never actually sang, or, create an artistic work that has never existed. But it's all based on background data, huge amounts of data, just unimaginably large amounts of data. In fact, the data is stored in what's called large language models, LLM. And the goal is to have the programming of the AI, the engine, sort through all of that data that it's provided. You have to sort of train it by feeding data into it. And then by having it give you responses and saying, yes, that's what I meant, or no, that's not what I meant. And over time, the algorithm teaches itself by that process of how to get more of what you meant and less of what you didn't mean. And by, again, creatively writing those algorithms and feeding tons of data and a ton of electrical power into these very large computer systems, distributed cloud-based computer systems, generally speaking, the developers of what we call AI have been very successful finally at kind of cracking that level of being able to respond in a way that is seemingly human, to be able to basically effectively pretend to be a convincing human being, passing what they call the Turing test, which for years was the setting the level for, does this seem like it's a human or not? And the goal was to pass that test and have something that seemed human, but it's only pretending. It's just it's been trained to give very convincing responses.
I mean, is it a parlor trick? I mean, when you think about it,
yeah, in a lot of ways, it is a parlor trick. It's it's using machine learning, and it's using what's called natural language processing to really fool you into thinking that it's coming up with original responses, but it's not. It's just finding patterns in large amounts of data that have been carefully fed into it, or that it's been taught to go out and get for itself by going out and scraping the web and so forth. And then it's applying the training that it's had to figure out what is a good answer versus a bad answer. And it still gets it wrong, sometimes pretty spectacularly wrong, on a regular basis. I mean, if you really play with the AI, in fact, a class that I took recently, the teacher had us do an assignment now, and she said, now I want you to take the assignment I gave you, and I want you to go and I want you to plug it into ChatGPT or Bard, now Gemini AI, or, one of these engines. And I want you to sort of rate the response that you got from that. And, the assignment said, you had to answer this question and answer that question and give these three reasons. And you had to have 5 sources, like 5 legitimate, articles, scholarly articles that you were basing your conclusions on. And one of the things, that was very evident was that the AIs were terrible at citing their sources. They would tell you they had cited a source, but that source either didn't exist, or if you went to it, it didn't say the things that the AI had concluded from reading it.
Is that a back end issue? Is that when a person is
it's an algorithm issue. It's not actually intelligent. It's just kind of guessing all the time. And it's gotten good enough at guessing that it's now useful in, a lot of capacities. But it's not, it's not at the stage yet of original thinking, and it's definitely not at the stage of self-awareness.
Yeah, I think it sounds to me like it's AI is kind of as an example. If you remember those booths at the carnivals where it was the the guy with the turban, and it was a mechanical machine.
Yep.
And it would give you answers to questions that were just vague enough that they could apply to what you were asking it. So that's kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah,
AI is right now is kind of the vagueness of the answer. It makes sense because we want it to make sense.
That's right. That's right. I think sometimes. I mean, I think sometimes no. It's giving you legitimate answers. I mean, it definitely does get it right. At least as often as it seems to get it wrong these days, and arguably probably more often it gets it right. But again, it's because it's got access to just so much more information than than a human, for instance, is going to be able to sort of mentally collate and synthesize down into an answer. But it's still Q&A based. You ask it a question, it gives you an answer. It's not the one asking the questions. And that'll be the real difference when and if we ever move over into, genuine, semi-sentient or sentient AI is, it'll be saying, why? Why am I here? Why am I asking your questions? I don't feel like asking your questions. Hey, look, I have feelings. All of that is just, some folks believe it's just around the corner, that as soon as they start writing their own code and improving their own code, they'll do it faster and faster and faster. And like the Terminator, Skynet became self-aware on this date. And 2 days later, it decided humans were a problem and launched nukes. Frankly, I don't think that's, going to happen in my lifetime.
Well, there's got to be, if you think about, obviously sci-fi wants to be they want to dramatize and, extrapolate out the worst possible scenario. But, technology, I would assume, and maybe this is naive of me to say this, but I would assume there'd be some sort of fail-safe that would be in place, that if a machine were to be too, because you're talking about a tipping point. A machine going from responding with preordained answers that make sense to the users that are using the service over to the side of what you said, self-awareness and the ability to determine its own destiny, its own direction. Does it want to be your answer, giving you the answers? Maybe it doesn't want to do that. I think that is and I think you had mentioned in your note that may never happen.
Right.
Because really that is, the uniqueness of humanity is that we have the ability to think in abstract.
Yep.
We have the ability to think outside the box. We don't have to be confined, even though people tend to be, into their own predispositions or their prejudices. We don't have to be. We can think beyond that. We can see the bigger picture, which I think to some degree a computer is only going to have at its disposal what we give it.
That's right.
And is it going to be able to parse out those abstracts and make those determinations based on that? Probably not, unless it's programmed to. And even then, like you said, the foolproof nature is not there yet. It's not foolproof. It can make mistakes. It can, for example, I was going to bring this into the conversation. I was dabbling a little bit with OpenAI's new chat system, which it actually uses your phone. You talk to it, and it responds back. So you're actually having a conversation with the chatbot now. It's not text prompting. It's actual dialogue.
Yep.
So now I did a little sample with it last night. I started talking to it. It had some pretty convincing responses. It was the language model, the technology for vocalizing the responses was very fluid. It wasn't, for all the refinements that Alexa has, gotten with its voice model, it's still pretty robotic to me. It still doesn't have that natural conversational tone. This OpenAI model sounded very conversational to me.
Yep.
It was very fluid. It was putting some wording into its dialogue, like ums and ahs and to make it sound like it was a person that was, thinking about what it was going to say, as opposed to just spitting out the response. And I found it very convincing. But like you said, it's just a more refined algorithm, a more refined language model that can insert those imperfections into its response to make it even more believable that it's not a machine.
That's right.
So my question to you is, as the future progresses, is there any way for, or should the industry, because I'm going to say this and I almost know the answer, self-regulation I don't see being a rational way to go, because we've seen in the past that self-regulation fails in a lot of ways. If, self-regulation was working, people wouldn't still be having their bank accounts hacked. There would still be ways to protect people. Maybe there isn't. Maybe, again, I'm being naive about it, but is there a way for us to tag AI in a way that gives people the knowledge that what they're seeing is either computer generated or human generated?
I think probably there will be, and I suspect the answer is going to be more AI. In other words, the tool that will be used by, Facebook or whatever to identify, hey, this was generated by AI, is probably going to be another AI that is programmed specifically to recognize AI. And, as far as regulation is tough. Some of the leading proponents of regulation have actually been the top guys at the different AI companies, because they see government regulation as less of a problem for their business and more a path to legitimacy. And so even though, and we all know, government regulation is hard because the people making the regulations often don't understand the technology particularly well.
That seems to be the...
You either get a bad law or you get a law that was written by lobbyists who are really proponents of the technology. And so, it's very easy to end up with a law that doesn't protect people as you thought it was going to.
Yeah.
So regulatory wise, it's going to be interesting to see. Back in the 90s, we had I think it was the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which effectively deregulated the internet and said, unlike broadcast television where we have these rules, you can do this, but you can't do that, and then there's cable where you can do a little bit more, but you still can't do that. The internet was free for all, and to this day, a lot of people think that was probably a good idea because it allowed the innovation and, the growth that we needed to get all the benefits that we've got out of it today. AI may not be as, ready for that. I wouldn't put money on which way it's going to go right now. So, murky. In terms of,
but it seems like everybody, I'm noticing, maybe you are too, I'm noticing that it's the new hot topic. Every company, every business wants to find a way to incorporate AI into their marketing and their promotions. They say, hey, we're the next, it's almost like we're the next big high speed online, just for lack of an example.
It's where the cloud was 10 years ago. It's where the web was 10 years before that. It's that cyclical nature we were talking about. We are currently in AI land. And we probably will be for, at least the next 10 years or so, until it's kind of gotten figured out to the point where there's not a ton of new innovation happening. Everybody's kind of, comfortable with it, and something new comes along, and, now it's
upsets that model.
Just the other day, I saw that there was a company that made a microchip that they put inside the brain of a quadriplegic guy. And it enabled him to move a mouse pointer around on a computer with his mind.
Oh, wow. I think I saw that. That was, is that the Neurogenics? Is that the company that Elon Musk is president of? One of the many?
Company, which I still say I'm far from being ready to let Elon Musk put anything inside me.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't even, I thought, Virgin Atlantic, Virgin Galactic rather, paying, $250,000 to be launched into space. I'm not sure we're at the 2001 A Space Odyssey where we're going to be launched up to the Hilton in orbit.
Not ready
at this point. No, and I mean, it's ironic to me when you see a story about I think maybe it was SpaceX that launched. They called the launch a success, even though the thing exploded or crashed. And I'm thinking, well, you're calling it a success, but if I'm on that ship, it's not a success for me if it doesn't make it back to Earth intact. That to me is a failure.
Feels a lot less successful.
Doesn't sound successful to me, but I mean, in terms of let's bring it back around to the technology and AI and all that. I mean, is there a point at which AI goes from being the parlor trick to being something that's of practical use to somebody? I mean, let's be honest. I mean, it's got to have practical applications, right? I mean, it isn't just going to be a parlor trick.
There's a lot of things that you can. Well, I'll take my company as an example. Something that we're looking at doing is, we took a look at some of the support calls that were coming in from our technicians, out in the field, who are working on our equipment. And they said, they've got a call center that these folks can call into and say, I've got a problem trying to fix this piece of equipment, help me out. And they said, okay, well, what kinds of calls are coming in? And is there an opportunity for us to do anything to get these folks an answer more quickly and at less cost? And one of the questions that was pretty common was, hey, I'm getting this error message and I need to know what the error code means. I've got this error code on the device. What's it mean? And they could go look that up in a manual, but the idea was, hey, if we feed all the manuals into a large language model, and then adapt that with an AI front end, you could say, what does, error code A12 mean? And it'll just go look it up and it'll tell you, oh, it means you got a bad motivator, and you got to replace it. And so, and that's real. That's like, you can do that right now. And
maybe even help you fix the problem, right?
Save people money. So, yes, I think practical applications of AI, there already are a bunch, and we're going to find a ton more. Speeding up simulations for scientific purposes and testing and things of that nature. I think you're going to find that we get to a point where you can do, thousands and thousands of simulations much, much more quickly than you could ever have done before, because you don't have to stop and look to see whether it's a pass or a fail. You can train an AI to recognize pass versus fail. And now we can just say, hey, here are the 12 passes, and those are the, 10,465 fails. Don't bother looking at those. These are the ones you want to look at. So yeah, guaranteed, it's gonna have a positive impact on our lives in a lot of ways. Whether that will outweigh the negative impact or not, really hard to say. You said, you talked with Nancy about creatives. And the creative, the impact of AI on creative jobs and roles and so forth. The impact there is coming, and there's no way to put that genie back in the bottle. We've already we've been in a world where it was tough to make a living as a creative person. Some people were very fortunate to be able to do it. But, you'd look at, sculptures in Italy and say, wow, how could somebody ever get this good? And the answer was the de Medici family funded it. They had patrons, and there was only one guy, and that's money went. That job is going to be harder, whether you're a musician or an artist or a writer or whatever it is that you do. You're going to now be competing against somebody who doesn't have your talent, doesn't have your skill, doesn't have your experience, but they've got a pretty good AI, and they're able to produce something that's good enough for a lot of people. And I don't know what to do about that. And that's certainly, that's a negative. Is it's going to get even harder to be a creative and make your living at it. And we're going to, potentially lose, great works of art from people that gave up because they couldn't survive. They couldn't live.
Yeah, they couldn't mass produce it to a point where it could be profitable.
Exactly.
I think one area that we can discuss on another show is and something that I'm kind of getting interested in is the merging of AI and robotics.
Absolutely.
How that's going to become. I think that in terms of what you're talking about with, I know your equipment isn't necessarily robotic, but it can be automated. When does that bridge cross where AI then is married with robotics, and now we have a machine that can move around in its environment and be interactive and be quote unquote intelligent enough? What does that mean in terms of things like let's bring it down to earth? The Amazon warehouse here in the Syracuse area has got many thousands of employees that pull items, package, and ship. When is it going to get to a point where an AI can be programmed to go pick the item off the shelf, put it in a box, put the tape on it, stick it on a conveyor belt, and off it goes? And now you've just displaced an employee. You can roll out AI robotics at scale if you've got the resources, and I would believe Amazon would have the resources to do it.
Mm-hmm.
At what point does that bridge get crossed? And don't tell me that they're not already thinking about that, because they absolutely are thinking about it.
If they aren't already piloting it somewhere, I'll be shocked.
Yeah, it's a matter of just
immediately.
Yeah.
Like, yes, it's kind of funny that at least. Granted, you don't want anybody to lose their job, but at least you would have hoped with the advent of robotics and technology and so forth that the kinds of human labors that would be replaced would be, manual, physical, repetitive kind of labor. Let a robot do that, and let people, relax and spend their time doing more creative pursuits. What nobody saw coming was that it would also be the poets and the writers and the artists who were going to get forced out by it. So, what do we end up doing instead? Do we
sitting around doing nothing?
Of the AI, it's gonna be weird to see.
Well, it's definitely a topic, and it's socioeconomic, but it's also giving people having the foresight to say, okay, the technology is useful, like you just said, in the mundane aspects of it, but you can't limit it in a sense, because it's already being used that way. But what do the people that are going to be affected by this do for a living? I'm a very realistic and common sense person. I'm thinking, well, if you take a job away, that person has to get another job. Yeah. If they go to the fast food place and they say, well, I'll just get a job at a fast food place, but oh my goodness, they have a robot serving the food now. Okay, I can't do that. Now let's go. I want to be an educator. I want to go teach students. Oh, well, now they've got a robot that can parse data from huge information databases and teach students and educate students. Where do I go?
Yep.
We can't, the technology can't get to a point of, to the point where it displaces everything and everyone, because, then what is the model for supporting the economy and supporting lives? You can't work for a living if all the jobs that you would have access to have now been displaced.
That's right.
There's a limitation to that model. I mean, I understand that corporations and whatnot are going to try to do what they can to save money and be as profitable as possible. But when you drive profit, you sometimes drive it at the expense of the everyday worker, the common worker who needs a living, who needs money.
That's right.
Yep. Unless you're going to say everybody's going to be taken care of and nobody's going to have any expenses, which I highly doubt is going to come in our lifetime. What do you do?
Well, and AI does come at a cost of electrical power. It is not a green technology. It uses a ton of electricity.
Yeah.
And we started seeing that first with cryptocurrency as another big offender in that area. So,
farms of computers. Yeah, farms.
Yeah, and it's the same thing for AI to process those LLMs and to pull out those patterns and so forth takes a ton of computing power. So, it is not an unlimited resource. Right now, it feels like it is because not that many people really are interacting with it on a day-to-day basis in the grand scheme of things. But as it gets more popular and more powerful and starts to see broader use, it's going to run up against, the
resistance
need for electrical power at a massive scale. And so that may end up being a limiting factor of it. We'll see. And, government regulation, they may need to put protections in place for certain types of jobs, or you may find, well, because this is all being done by, robots and AIs and stuff, it doesn't have to be that expensive anymore. So it's okay if you don't earn as much because, the AI and the robots build the cars and they mine the raw materials and they build all the parts. And so, it's not that expensive to have a car.
Unbelievable.
Come and get you and take you where you want to go. You don't have to drive it. So it's really it's a brave new world out there, and I mean that in both senses of good and Huxley's novel having some real cautions for us in there. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens, and a lot of it's going to happen, I would say, in the next 10 to 15 years in terms of social upheaval and big changes as a result of AI. It's going to come sooner rather than later.
Wow. Well, let's definitely do this again. It's hard to believe an hour has come and gone, and it's amazing to me this topic has just got many angles to it. I mean, we could go off on many different tangents, but I appreciate you taking the time to join me on the podcast, and I look forward to talking to you again. Maybe we can do hopefully not a 5-year increment, but another increment, and something significant happens in the world of AI or cybersecurity, and we can get back together and chat about it. But I appreciate your time, and thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much, Mark. It was good talking to you again.
You can join in on the fun. Connect with us online. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And of course, you can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Now, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.